right. Well, hey, Feisty tribe. I hope you guys are all hanging in there. I know that right now can be a kind of difficult time, and I just want you all to know that I'm in there with you. And to be honest, it's been kind of a roller coaster for me. I've just been trying to tackle each emotion as it has kind of come up, and at first it was feeling unsure and kind of overwhelmed at having to find a way to work from home. And then it was kind of like a fear and an anxiety, and kind of induced by a huge amount of kind of like information input and listening to the news, and probably spending too much time on like social media and news articles, and having just notifications for all of that. And that just led me to feel kind of overwhelmed. And I know I talked about it in previous podcasts, and I talked about it on a couple of my lives as well on social media, that has helped a lot to kind of quiet some of that and choose what I really want to hear and what I want to engage with and how much time I spend doing that. And but there are still days that it's hard, and I still feel overwhelmed by kind of everything that's going on. And then it was kind of this wave of determination to find hope and to reframe some of the negative thoughts I was having, and how to kind of tackle this time. And then there was like some guilt and feelings of wanting to do everything, and watching people do amazing things during this time and really take advantage of the time that they had. And there's a whole host of things that I wish that I had more time to do, but I'm still working full time. And anyway, so just like that wave of emotion, and kind of like being caught in between, wanting to be really creative and wanting to be there for all of you and wanting to give more, but at the same time juggling all the normal stuff that I have to do, and my own kind of emotions and my own kind of feelings and stuff, which is difficult. And in this time of kind of trying to be really determined to reframe things and try and be more positive, and wanting to kind of be a light, I did a lot of reframing of my thoughts, and leaning heavily on journaling, and trying to do that each evening to kind of work through my feelings that have happened all throughout the day. And I know I talked about that with you guys as well in previous episodes, and so I hope that has given you guys some inspiration, I guess. And I scrapped all of the podcast episodes I'd planned, and I didn't like throw stuff out for good. It just was, some of the topics didn't feel as pertinent. And so I kind of just put some stuff on the back burner so I could brainstorm the best way to serve all of you. And I've seen an incredible movement in the entrepreneur space, where the focus has shifted to like so totally to the serving side. And that honestly, it just makes my heart swell, and it was very inspirational. And I want to be that for all of you. And I want you guys to feel empowered by having resources and having a way to connect. And I want to try and build a community where people feel safe to talk about all the different mental health things, and talking about how they're feeling and what they're doing and how they're doing, especially at this time. So yeah. And then I guess I felt after that and being really encouraged, I felt kind of paralyzed because I didn't know what to offer to everybody besides like my usual, like, this is what I do and this is how we handle anxiety and here's different coping techniques for that, and go out and meditate and journal and all that. And so I felt paralyzed by trying to come up with something that I thought could serve everyone even better. And then I realized that by being honest and by being forthcoming with everything, that could probably mean a lot more than just another voice trying to, I guess, give you more to think about. And so lately, in the theme of being very open and honest, lately I've been hearing incredibly sad stories from others about businesses and from healthcare workers and from those caring for the ill. I also have like the very personal sadness that I can't be with my elderly grandma right now. And that social distancing from her is really, really important, but it's really hard. She's to not be there, especially as she's dealing with health things outside of anything to do with COVID, but it's impacting how she receives care, and that's really hard not to be there for her and for my family. And I am very well going to completely miss the birth of my very first niece or nephew, and that's really hard. And it's hard to be away from, my sister while she's going through this really incredible time being pregnant and going through all of that. So I feel for all of you who might be in similar situations, and my heart goes out to the people who are caring for those and dealing with all of those emotions and the emotions of those around them. And yeah, I just want you to know that I have my own personal feelings and emotions, and it's okay to feel all of those, and it's okay to feel sad. And talking with others and talking with all of you and talking with Tyler and my therapist and praying through it have been extremely helpful for me. And so I hope that you guys can find ways to stay connected, and that you can lean on each other, and feel free to reach out. I always will say that. And I will do everything I can, and I will do my best to create that community for all of you. There are an incredible amount of resources out there to help you. So yeah, please reach out and know that it's okay to not be okay. And I know it might be kind of a heavy episode already, but I wanted to be real and vulnerable with all of you. I think that's really important to kind of like set that example, because it can be really hard to talk about things, but it's important to talk about them. And I'll do my best to try and end with something positive. And a little bit more uplifting, or maybe find something funny. Most importantly, I want you to know that it's okay to have mixed emotions, and emotions maybe you haven't felt before, and that kind of leads me to today's topic. I thought it would be really helpful to cover grief. So Harvard Business Review has an article that I found extremely informative. The article details a conversation that one of the staff members has with a gentleman named David Kessler. And he is the leading expert on grief right now. He wrote one of the most popular grief books with another individual. And in the course of this interview, he explains that, yes, we're feeling lots of emotions, and one that makes us very uncomfortable, and we might not know why, is grief. So it hadn't occurred to me that might be some of the emotions or the mixed emotions that I was feeling. And And I've seen some therapists out there kind of drawing attention to this at this time. That kind of like unknown feeling and that like uncomfortable feeling that we might not be able to kind of like throw a label on is very well grief. And so in this article, David Kessler says, not only are we feeling grief, but we're dealing with different kinds of grief. And I had never heard of this until I came across this article, which is, prompted me to look more into grief, especially as it pertains to everything that's happening with COVID-19. So here's what he said about dealing with different kinds of grief. And I'm just going to quote it. He said, yes, and we're feeling a number of different griefs. We feel the world has changed, and it has. We know this is temporary, but it doesn't feel that way. And we realize things will be different. Just as going to the airport is forever different from how it was before 9/11, things will change, and this is the point at which they changed. The loss of normalcy, the fear of economic fall, the loss of connection. This is hitting us, and we're grieving collectively. We're not used to this kind of collective grief in the air. And so I'll link to that article. And I'm going to touch on a couple other things that this David Kessler gentleman talks about. And you guys can read it for yourself, but that's a quote from that. I had never considered that we're grieving for normalcy. I kind of had always pegged grief as like something that tied to the loss of life. And I guess that kind of still applies. So I know that there's a lot of like memes and some funny things out there about like extroverts going nutty in their homes or from being isolated, and there's different posts about like parents being driven crazy by their kids or whatever others are floating out there for humor. But chances are we're feeling a loss. We may not actually be able to describe that well, because like Kessler said, it's not something that we do often to like have this big like collective grief where so many people across your community, across the nation, across the world are all feeling this kind of collective grief of normalcy and knowing that our lives have changed. Stop. So yeah, I never really considered like the grief of things outside of just like a human death. So he discusses a thing called anticipatory grief, which he says is the feeling we get when the future just feels so uncertain, and it's usually centered around death, and it's that feeling of kind of impending doom, I guess is the best way to describe it. Like when we hear a hurricane is coming, and so you start preparing for that. Or when somebody gets like a really scary diagnosis. And in this case, it's, this virus that's kind of like knocking on our door. And it ruins our sense of safety. And that is the feeling of grief that we're feeling, is this kind of like loss of feeling safe just in our normal day-to-day lives. So in the course of this interview with Harvard Business Review, one of the interviewers asks, what do you say to someone who's read all of this and is still feeling overwhelmed with grief? And this is after David Kessler has talked about kind of like the stages of grief and ways to kind of work through that. And I'll get to that. But I thought that this question was really, really great. And instead of trying to like pull things out of the response, I'm just going to read it to you. So David Kessler says, in response to still feeling overwhelmed, keep trying. there is something powerful about naming this as grief. It helps us feel what's inside of us. So many people have told me in the past week, I'm telling my coworkers I'm having a hard time, or I cried last night. When you name it, you feel it and it moves through you. Emotions need motion. It's important to acknowledge what we go through. One unfortunate byproduct of the self-help movement is we're the first generation to have feelings about our feelings. We tell ourselves things like, I feel sad, but I shouldn't feel that. Other people have it worse. We can and we should stop at the first feeling. I feel sad. Let me go for 5 minutes to feel sad. Your work is to feel your sadness and feel your anger, whether or not someone else is feeling something. And fighting it doesn't help because your body is producing that feeling. If we allow the feelings to happen, they'll happen in an orderly way, and it empowers us, and then we're not victims. And I just thought that was such an incredible answer to that, and it helped me, and it gave me a lot of, I guess, peace, because I am one of those people who felt very much like well, I shouldn't be that sad, about things. I'm so lucky I still have my job. There are so many people who don't. I should feel lucky because I'm still able to do things like FaceTime with my grandma, even though I can't be there. And she's doing okay. And there are a lot of people out there who are losing people right now. And so, I kind of like almost talked myself out of those feelings. And I think that it's really important, like what David Kessler is saying, that we just stop and give ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling without dissecting it and pulling it apart and trying to change it. So let's talk about grief for a second outside of COVID-19, just kind of as like hey, this is grief. So what is it exactly, right? Psychology Today defines it as acute pain that accompanies a loss. And so I think that is specific and vague at the same time, and that makes it quite appropriate, right? Where it's specific enough that we understand, what it applies to, but at the same time, it's vague enough that it's not saying that it just pertains to death or human death or a specific loss. It's just saying a loss. So I think that ties into what I was saying before is, the loss of feeling normal or feeling safe. All of that is still grief. And I'll link the Psychology Today article that I found and that I'm using as well. So in this, small article about grief in general, they go on to explain that it's a deep emotion because it's a reflection of something that we love. And that can feel kind of all-encompassing. And so it's a very deep emotion. And it can be very complex. So I think that makes a lot of sense with what David Kessler was saying, talking about how we may be feeling kind of grief around our current state of things. And this is on the top, and this is on top of those that are losing loved ones, whether it's, loss from COVID-19, or it's loss of a person that maybe already was, at risk, and struggling and fighting for their life. And on top of the other kinds of things that we feel like we're losing right now. And so, like I said, I'm really lucky not to have lost anyone in my circle for COVID-19 or anything else during this time so far. For those of you who have suffered a loss, I am so sorry. And I hope that today's conversation and, being able to be a part of this community and talking about grief at least allows you a space to feel safe, kind of in your sadness. Like I said, I'm so sorry. I feel for all of those that I am bearing witness to them working through things and their grief, the stories and everything. And so I feel for you. I think it's important to remember grief is complex and there is no right way to move through it. And people don't grieve the same. I think that we all have heard that, but it's very different to really understand it. And I think it's important to remind yourself that not everyone will move through this time the same. So it's important to remember not everyone grieves the same, and it's important to keep that in mind when you're interacting with others, especially right now. Everyone is having a different experience at this time, and there's no prediction of how someone will handle their grief. And that being said, it's equally as important to stay connected to others. The symptoms of grief can look a lot like depression from what I was reading. So helping those around you and close to you identify what they're going through can be integral. Because like David Kessler said, if you can name it and acknowledge it, you can move through it. And it's even better to move through it with someone, with a support system. And without support, grief can it can become quite severe, and it can lead to things like chronic loneliness. And that's just another reason to check in on each other and extend compassion before opinion. I've been trying to remember that. Because there might be moments where somebody does something that they wouldn't normally, and instead of jumping to a conclusion and just kind of like throwing your opinion out there or holding judgment, being really intentional to put compassion first and look at maybe the scenario from like a bird's eye view and just being like, okay, that's not how they normally would talk to me or talk to their child or talk to a coworker. Something else might be going on. And you can leave it at that, or you can ask. You can ask them how they're doing. You can ask if they need anything and extend that grace and that compassion. And that can make all the difference. That can completely turn around somebody's day. It could get them to open up about something. So if you have the capacity to do that, that's a huge thing right now. And so I have included, I'll include the link to Psychology Today that discusses grief outside of COVID-19. And you can look into that for more details. But I do want to talk about, the stages of grief. I think that most of us have heard of that. But more recently, it's been determined that it's not stages. They don't go in any kind of set order. So I'm going to just list them to you for reference. But just keep in mind, like, the order in which I'm saying them isn't necessarily the order in which everyone kind of like works their way through it. So denial. Many times this one is early on, and it's kind of like this virus won't affect me, or this won't affect us that badly, or and that is something that usually those kinds of feelings and outlook is usually earlier on. So anger is another one, and that one is kind of like, maybe being angry with government officials and how they're responding, or what they're saying, or the fact that they're like, you have to stay home. And I know that I've seen quite a bit of that where people are angry and they're frustrated. And then bargaining is another one, and that one can kind of look like, well, if I stay inside for these 2 weeks, after that I should be able to be out and things will be better. And then sadness, and that one is kind of like, when will this end? Is it going to end? How is it going to end? And then being, sad for those around you, or sad for yourself and how your life has changed. And then lastly is acceptance, and this one genuinely is usually last. And this is kind of like coming to terms with what is happening. And it's kind of saying like, okay, this is reality. This is my current reality. This is my new world. This is my new reality. And I have to figure out how to keep moving, or actively engaging and moving forward. That's acceptance. And so, like I said, this is generally the last stage, although there is information indicating that you can kind of slip back into the other stages based on what's going on in your support system, and if there's kind of like almost like a relapse because there's an introduction of a new thing that ties into that original grief. And yeah, man, grief is very complex. Trying to gather information and be succinct was difficult. So I hope that you find this helpful, at least as a jumping off point. And so I want to kind of transition into some things that you can do, and kind of coping with grief. And then I have a cool piece from NPR about kind of how to honor grief, which I found to be really enlightening. So, recommendations to cope with grief, and this is coming from David Kessler in that Harvard Business Review article, understanding the stages of grief. We kind of went over those. You can always look up more information. I know, I'm positive there's a bunch out there. So yeah, understanding the stages of grief, and then come into the present. So breathe and realize that nothing that you've anticipated is currently happening. Obviously, sometimes what we're worried about does happen, but a lot of times we get very like future focused, and that drives anxiety and a lot of other negative emotions. So it's good to just pause and breathe and kind of like walk yourself through a little bit of that logic, like having a fear of like the stores just being so empty and closing down, and stop and breathe and be like, okay, look around me. That hasn't happened yet. That thing that I'm worried about and fearful of and anticipating is not currently happening. And that can be powerful to kind of just bring yourself back to the present and remind yourself, okay, in this exact moment, I have food, I'm not sick, I have health, I have a roof over my head, etc., those kinds of things. And then another great thing that I pull on from meditation is to kind of like, I call it like engaging all of your senses. So if you can use your senses to kind of focus on the present and working through things like, okay, I can feel the carpet beneath my feet, or the floor beneath my feet, or this rug beneath my feet, or I can feel this blanket that's wrapped around me. I can smell the smells of like home and being safe here, and, kind of just pick one sense at a time and focus on that and what you feel like in that present moment. Meditation is also a great way to kind of like tap into this coping technique, and we've talked about that a ton, so I'm sure that you guys know where to find those resources, but that helps as well to remain present. That's a huge part of meditation. So and that's a great way to kind of be walked through it, as doing those guided meditations. So I encourage you to do that. Another one is let go of what you can't control. I think this one was a big one for me. The times that I did go out, or, Tyler and I will take a walk, and I'm seeing people engage in a way that I wouldn't necessarily call social distancing, like watching neighbors have kids over, and I get it. I get both sides. I get, kids are probably getting all sorts of crazy inside, and they just want to be able to go outside and do things, and, neighborhood kids, you can't necessarily keep them from kind of congregating if they're all outside doing activities, and I know it's really difficult for parents, and I know it's really difficult for the kids, and I also get the side of like people being really frustrated, because it's just like, hey, like if you don't do this, it's just going to make it worse for everybody. And so letting go of what you can't control, like you can't control those parents. You can't control the people who aren't being kind in grocery stores, but you can control yourself. You can make your own decisions. You can be mindful of those things, and it can be hard, but just try to remember what you can control and what you can't control. And then focus on compassion. Everyone will deal with their anxiety and their fear and their grief differently. Be patient. If you witness someone doing something that seems out of character, choose to check in with them, and it's probably their emotions. And then number 5 is, this is temporary. That's right. It will not last forever. And this one's a good one for me. I keep having to remind myself that, like, this is not going to last forever. It may seem very uncertain, and we have no idea when it will end, and that can be very overwhelming, but I can rest assured that what is currently happening will not last forever. I don't know the outcome. I don't know how long it will last. And I try really hard to like not let my mind go down that bunny trail and try and kind of just like bring it back to the present, and not think about like, okay, what will this all eventually look like, and just try and remember that what is currently happening is temporary. And this is, he listed it here in his conversation, David Kessler did, but I also have quite a bit of experience trying to practice this when it comes to anxiety and panic attacks, and remembering like this feeling right now is temporary, and that has helped me a lot dealing with kind of like that overwhelm and some of like the panic attack symptoms that I have gotten. Is just like, okay, this is temporary. It's uncomfortable and I don't like it and I want it to stop, and I know that it will. I know it will pass. So if you ever done that, you probably are pretty good at tapping into this, kind of like remembering that this current moment is temporary. And then lastly, he listed naming it. So naming it can help, and recognizing it for what it is grief, helps a lot. So I encourage you just to start simple and just say it out loud. Like, this is grief. What I'm feeling is grief. I'm allowed to be sad. I'm allowed to feel this way. And yeah, so those are the 6 things that were listed in that article, and then kind of my take on them. You can read the article, like I said, I'll link it, and then you can kind of come up with your own examples from what he's saying too. And then there's a piece, I didn't talk about any of the other portion of this article, but I'll definitely link it because it has some really great stuff in it. But NPR has an article out there, and I'm also going to guess that it's an interview that was on the radio, so you can probably listen to it too. A lot of those are turned into podcasts as well, so if you're somebody who likes to listen in like this, then I'm positive that you can find this on NPR. But they have it's the article called "Coronavirus Has Upended Our World and It's Okay to Grieve." So like I said, I'll link it. But 4 ways to honor your grief was a part of this article, and I thought that would be a really good one to kind of just go over, so you can feel like you can actively do some things to kind of honor how you're feeling. One is bear witness and communicate. So sharing our stories, that is such a huge thing with moving through all emotions, I think. And I use that as a way of coping and connecting with people about mental health in general, mental illness in general, is sharing my story and encouraging others to share theirs. It's extremely empowering, and it is really important because I think that it's important because it lets other people know that they're not alone. And so I think that is a great point. A lot of us are feeling this grief collectively, and so to just let people know that they're not alone is really impactful. If we can't talk about it, it's really hard to work through, and grief is not a thing to do and like be done with. It's not something that you're just like, oh, well, I'm gonna fix it and move on. So that's kind of important, because remembering that it lives in your psyche, and until it's been worked through, it's gonna sit there. And so working through it by talking and communicating is a great way to get started on kind of like moving through that emotion. And then write, create, and express. That's number 2. Art therapy. Anyone? That's immediately what I thought of. I have done some art therapy in my time. I may or may not have a giant Harry Potter coloring book and a specific set of markers and colored pencils that sit on a shelf next to some coloring books, some adult coloring books. So yeah, I have actually a pretty decent collection. It's a thing that I get gifted too. So no shame. And I know Amazon has a ton of options too, and they will deliver them right to you. So that's one thing that I do is coloring. There's a ton of different kinds of art. Obviously, you could paint, you could draw, and I when I am doing any kind of like, I don't draw very well at all, but when I think of like art therapy, a lot of times I think of something that's very like open-ended and kind of abstract, but maybe for you it's like coming up with something that's a little bit more ceremonial, and kind of very representative of how you're feeling, and maybe grieving what you've lost and focusing on what you've lost. So they say, create some kind of ceremonial object to kind of like host the grief, and it is almost like transposing that emotion onto an object. So that object might just be a piece of paper, but it also could be, something that you've sculpted or created somehow. And another thing that they bring up is recording it somehow. So by journaling, it can help express, identify, and acknowledge loss and grief. And so I know I talk about journaling all the time. I don't I don't need to go over all of that again. So another one that they listed is meditate. So this helps, and this is number 3. So this helps lower stress and slow down your system. I think that we've talked a ton about meditation and all the benefits of meditation quite a bit. So just remember that meditation can be a great asset to you at this time. And it can help give yourself kind of like that breath and that space to just sit and feel. And I think that that can be really important, especially when dealing with something very complex like grief. Yeah. So, last but not least on NPR's list here is be open to joy. Connect, find joy in those shared moments. And, you know, even in these challenging times, it's important to let joy and gratitude and some of those positive emotions in, as difficult as it may seem and as impossible as it may seem to find the positive. If you don't let it in, it can be, I feel as though it could just drag out that feeling of grief and sadness. So try to let the joy in. Try and find gratitude and joy in the little moments as well. And I know that I incorporate that into my journaling as part of drawing focus to that, and also talking to people and trying to talk about like the mundane, joyful things, you know. And I think that can be really refreshing at this time and really uplifting. So with that being said, I wanted to share a kind of funny story from my house this morning. And so you guys all know that I have a dog. I have 2 dogs, actually 2 Aussies, Jace and River. And so they actually are some of the most like personality filled animals that I have ever come across. I've had dogs all my life, but they are by far the most like, their little personalities are just like so bold. And so we Tyler and I kind of know a little bit about like their personalities and what they're like. And so River is super athletic, and she is really agile, super smart, figures stuff out really, really quickly. And she also is really incessant about her fetching of a couple of these like smaller little balls that we have. And we've got like, mostly they're like a plastic, soft plastic, and I think they're both supposed to squeak, but she's broken the squeakers now on a couple of them. Anyway, so she was being really insistent on having the ball thrown, and so Tyler was throwing it down the hall, and Jace is not the most athletic dog, and certainly not what you would expect from an Australian Shepherd, because they're supposed to be quite agile. And he's not. So but he likes to play fetch along with River, and sure enough, he is standing in the hallway, and Tyler throws the ball, and River takes off down the hall, and Jace, in his like haste to turn around and be a part of this game, whacks his face straight on the wall, like no holds barred, barrels straight into the wall as he's trying to turn around to go the other direction down the hall. And unfortunately, this is not abnormal. This is a thing that he does on like doors and sometimes furniture quite often. And so Tyler and I just busted out laughing, and River, of course, retrieved the ball, and Jace is just standing there looking at us like so betrayed that we're laughing at his misfortune. And I felt bad, and I checked on his little face and made sure that he was okay. But in that moment, it was just really nice to kind of like laugh out loud at something that was so ordinary and something that we know happened. This is definitely not the first time that he's done that, but it just felt really good to have a very normal morning moment as I'm getting ready and hearing all of the, the craziness of the dogs behind me, and all of a sudden looking down the hall and hearing Jace just go straight into that wall. So think of those kinds of things, those little stories and those moments of, like when you're talking with friends and connecting with people, or the funny things with your animals. Like, thank goodness for them in this time. If you have animals, I bet that you can relate that they are just, it's really wonderful to have them, especially at this time, and they create all sorts of little pieces of entertainment and for me, it brings a lot of normalcy, and reminding me to be grateful for things like being able to stay home, and because they love it. They love that I'm working from home, because they don't have to be kenneled or sequestered in a room, except right now because they like to try and be loud while I'm trying to record. But yeah, just taking those small moments to find some joy and to find normal and new normal in this kind of unprecedented time. So I hope that you guys can visualize and enjoy my story. And I've been trying to post some stuff, and I posted a photo of River running around in a backyard. So she was enjoying her outside time as well. And just to kind of remind everybody that, we can find some sense of normal in all of this, and that helps. So I hope that you found some of like the techniques and the information really helpful. And I'm thinking of all of you and sending out all the positive vibes and encouraging you, in hoping that you can find space in our little Feisty Mindfulness tribe to belong and not feel alone, and to just connect. And I want to just end with a quote from David Kessler, and and then we'll call it a day. But he says, "I believe we will continue to find meaning now and when this is over." And I just found that to be really encouraging. Very simple, but also I think very true, that we can find meaning in this time, and we can make the best of this situation any way that we can. So I encourage you guys to reach out and talk and communicate and be a part of your communities and be a part of the Feisty Mindfulness community, and let me know if there are things that you want covered. As always, I am open to your comments and your feedback, and I want to hear from you and connect with you. And you guys, I think, know how to do that. You can get a hold of me on Instagram, and you can email and the website, and you can always fill out the contact forms. I know that I'm a little bit behind on getting the blogs up, but I'm focusing on getting that done very soon. And I also want to let you guys know that I'm going to be working really hard to get a YouTube page going. I know I have just one post right now, and it's the post that I did live while I recorded it and then posted it to IGTV, and so I made that into a YouTube video, and so that one's up there, and I'm recording today and hoping to get that up for you guys, and then hoping to put together a pretty cool Patreon for you guys, so you can get some sneak peeks, or you can watch pieces of me doing this live and engage with me that way, and keep it so that we can offer some really cool stuff for you guys there on the Patreon, and moving forward, trying to get some more video for you guys and get that up on YouTube, and trying to go live and everything. So some fun things that I've been trying to work on to give our community some more ways to connect. So I hope that you guys have a great day, and I will be thinking of you all.